Well, to help us take a critical look at the latest loan request, we have joining us in the studio an economist, Dr. Akintunde. Thank you so much for joining us.
It's a pleasure. It's my pleasure to be here again.
And also joining us from our Lagos studio is a development economist, Dr. N1.7Trn. Thank you, Doctor, for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
All right, so let's start with you, Dr. Akintunde. What's your impression actually about the National Assembly, and then of course the presidential request, and then of course what Nigeria needs at this point in time, because the deficit is now at an all-time, the borrowing has led to our debt being at an all-time high, and people are beginning to actually ask if this government is not borrowing too much. But while the government says it enjoys credibility among lenders internationally, and as a result of that, it has gone ahead to get these monies, and that it really needs it to actually execute some of its projects that are outlined in the budget. Your view?
Thank you very much for having me once again. The borrowing is part of Nigeria's planning to finance its budget. In the beginning of 2024, especially when the budget was passed to the National Assembly, the successive governments have, planned based on, budget deficits over the years. And budget deficit simply means government will borrow from foreign or international sources to finance the budget. This one is not an exemption, because the president submitted a budget deficit also for 2024, and it was in the plan that government will borrow, and the borrowing has gone to the National Assembly for approval. But specifically, this borrowing is for the capital portion, the capital projects of the 2024 budget, because we are now in a season, the dry season, where road, power, and a lot of other capital projects will be executed. And looking at what we experienced in the year, the parameters for 2024 budget were not even near to be achieved, but just a few of them that we got close to. The exchange rate was very high, more than what we budgeted for. The inflation rate was also higher than so many other parameters. So government will definitely, from the way the implementation was going, government had to definitely borrow to meet up with the capital portion of the 2024 budget.
All right, and Dr. Biari, I want to talk to you about the procedures for actually, taking this through the Parliament. Would you say that the Senate Committee on Local and Foreign Debt, chaired by former Sokoto State Governor Aliyu Wamako, did a serious evaluation about this request from the presidency, and some Nigerians have, especially CSOs, have raised eyebrows over the quick passage of this request, saying that it wasn't really subject to so much legislative intervention?
Okay, I'm not in a good position to evaluate if the National Assembly Committee actually did a thorough job. But of course, we know from day one that we are going to be running the budget deficit of 9.7 trillion naira. And if I am to read through the mind of this government, I am not advocating for them. And I think somebody will ask, okay, if the borrowing was to fund critical project transactions in Nigeria, infrastructure projects, why are we borrowing dollar to fund projects that has to do with infrastructure development, possibly roads, and all the rest of them that may require more of the naira component? And I want to begin to see as if I'm reading their mind. Basically, if they are to borrow naira based on the cost of fund in Nigeria today, MPR is about 26.5%. The cost of fund may be too high, especially in service need. I want to believe that they actually wanted to use one stone to kill two birds, borrowing dollar to shore up naira stability, defend the naira, and of course it's simply going to be single digit and even lower single digit. But the question is, after borrowing this dollar, what are we doing to ensure that we have enough dollar inflow over time to repay? Because there is this issue of being able to source for dollar to repay external debt obligations, unlike the naira where they can actually go print naira to pay off domestic lenders. Now, I want to believe I'm thinking their thoughts, I'm thinking their mind. Possibly, they want to borrow dollar to shore up, defend the naira, think with the mindset that over time we will ensure shore productivity, especially in the non-oil sector, exports to be able to pay off over the long-term period. Now, the question is, my colleague said that they are borrowing to fund capital projects. If you look at that budget waterfall, you see clearly that practically everything we are going to earn, both from oil and non-oil revenue, will be used to service recurrent expenditure, both non-debt services and the debt wages expenditure, which simply means we are borrowing, we are practically spending every of our revenue to take care of public service workforce of less than 2 million people in a country that has 228 million people. That is not very, very right. We need to see how we can reduce our cost of running governments, our recurrent expenditures down to at least 40% of total budget expenditure annually, as it is done in Senate climes. It's something we should be looking at doing. And we also need to look at how we can shore up non-oil export revenues. And there's always this focus on the federal government. What the federal government simply does is to fund budget deficits that they've actually stated from day one they are going to fund. We need to look at around the whole of Nigeria. Can we do better? We can actually do better. We need to start borrowing targeted towards productivity, targeted towards funding projects that can catalyze productivity. I have been privileged many times to speak on Arise on how we can actually borrow $15 billion to set up 2,500 clusters of agro-industrial parks across Nigeria that can yield us about $102.9 billion annually, create 7 million jobs, create 54,000 agro-rangers that will protect Nigeria, and catalyze economic growth and development that cascades down even to the lowest part of those that live at the lowest spectrum of the economic socio-economic pyramid. So we need to see there's nothing wrong with the borrowing. Borrowing is good. If you look at the US, and somebody even said 136 trillion naira, our total GDP size is about $252 billion. If you put it to naira based on the current autonomous exchange market rate, you see that it's about 439 trillion naira. So our total debt profile is about 30% of our GDP. Other countries have almost about 100% of their GDP as debt. But we should be asking ourselves, what are we borrowing to fund? We should look inward, borrow to catalyze productivity. And we must look at the subnational units, the states and the local government areas. And that is where my focus is. Federal government is actually supposed to be there coordinating things. So borrowing is not wrong, but we must borrow specifically to catalyze productivity and enhance the socio-economic well-being of the average Nigerian.
All right, Dr. Berry, are we borrowing our way out of trouble? Because that's what people are very much interested in knowing. Not just piling the debts. Are we borrowing our way out of the huge challenges that we actually have? Can, in the next 2 years, Nigerians see the reasons why we borrow this money and why the local and foreign debts are all ballooning?
I don't think we are borrowing out of our problem. We are actually borrowing to compound our problem. And that is the truth. Nigeria ticks the right boxes to be able to first of all, have domestic food self-sufficiency and export nothing less than $270 to $350 billion worth of agro-commodities. But for us to do this, we have to take away focus from the federal government and look at the states and local government areas. I've been privileged over the last 10 years to speak to governors' forums and to share with them ideas of what they can do conceptually to grow the economy of Nigeria. Nigeria is a federated unit, and we must understand that the federal government actually exists because we have the local government and the states. In a federation, the central power derives its power from the federated units. And by the reason of the Land Use Act, the state governors and local government chairmen have a lot to do in boosting productivity. Like I've shared with you, and I'll keep on sharing it, we can create 2,500 agro-industrial clusters. The lowest hanging fruit, $6 million for each cluster. We have the template developed, what we will do, how we will do it, when we will do it, and the outcome over the next 1 year. All that we need is for the federal government to adopt it, create in the presidency an execution team working with the state and local government chairmen. We will unlock $109 billion into this economy annually. We will create 7 million jobs. We will have 154,000 agro-rangers that will protect every inch of this land. And we will borrow 15 billion. You remember that the central bank governor, Yemi Cardoso, simply said he's not going to lend based on what happened over the last 8 years under Buhari. He said to the governors and local government chairmen, give me the structure and I will fund it. If the governors are able to come up with what we have come up with, missions, community, diaspora, private, public partnership arrangement, put the structures in place. Even Akintunde addition of AFDB, we will fund it. Afrexim will fund it. There are a lot of development funding agencies that will fund it. The challenge we have in terms of productivity are the governors and the local government chairmen. The faster and the earlier we look away from the center and look at the consultant, the better for Nigeria.
Yes, I mean, that's some very free consulting for both the federal government and the states and local governments. And I'll bring you in, Dr. Akintunde. What Nigerians are actually asking is demanding more accountability in terms of these loans. While borrowing itself is not a bad thing, I want to ask you the same question. Are we borrowing our way out of trouble?
Yeah, we are actually borrowing to compound our problems, and we are borrowing to increase the debt profile of Nigeria. I think so far, I think in the last 8 years, this borrowing now that is passed to the National Assembly is, I think, about the highest so far to be passed by the National Assembly in one tranche, 1.7 trillion naira. The debt profile is actually increasing, and just like my colleague, Doctor, just said, what are we borrowing for? Borrowing is not bad, but are we borrowing for productivity? I've so many times challenged, okay, government borrowed money to construct the second Niger bridge, and the bridge has been told, they said the bridge is going to generate the fund that they used to construct the bridge. Now, so far so good. How much have they generated in the last 1 year? Realized from the second Niger bridge that it will finance the money that they've borrowed to construct that bridge. So we see that borrowing to construct road is not productive. Yes, we'll say, yes, they need to construct road to the farms, you know, to the interior land, to the rural areas, so that they can, you know, transport agricultural products to the city centers. But I can tell you that the cost of doing that road is actually high, and we borrow a lot of money. And how do we generate, you know, funds to actually pay back the money that has been borrowed? So we need to borrow, just like my colleague said, to invest it in industrialization, such that when we industrialize, we can easily generate the money. If we had borrowed to invest in industrializing our agricultural sector, we will have created jobs, we will have increased our GDP and a lot of other things. Okay.
Now, Dr. Biari, are we seeing manufacturers, you know, having access to the federal government to actually get some form of interventions from this kind of loans that the federal government gets? Because like he has said, yes, the temptation is always to deploy these funds more into infrastructure, because those in power want the people to see concrete things that they've done. But of course, you have manufacturers, people who want to actually boost some of these clusters that you've talked about, seeking, you know, capital, but the capital is not available. Most Nigerian banks are more interested in short-term lending. And so because of that, they are not interested in boosting the manufacturing sector. So how do you think that manufacturers could collaborate better to actually get some sort of funding to create the huge jobs? Because I don't know where else the government will be creating more jobs other than manufacturing. And so how do you think that there could be a synergy between both?
Sambo, government is not good in supporting business, in terms of running businesses. You know, I always sometimes wonder why we expect government to provide funding for manufacturers and private sector entrepreneurs. What government should be doing is putting in place the required infrastructure, policy and program framework to ease, to provide ease of doing business. I'll give you typically, I'm from the southeast of Nigeria. Report shows that 60% of the containers that come into Nigeria actually find their way to the southeast and the south-south. If I'm one of the governors of the 5 southeast states, what do I do to boost productivity? The other day they were talking about VAT, and the argument was how they will share the waterfall. They weren't even looking at the derivatives, how they can put in place things that will make their states attractive for people to go there, or how they can actually change the framework on how the VAT is raised, charged from point where the headquarters of the companies are to where the things are consumed. I'll give you an example. I'm from the southeast. 60% of the containers go to the south and south, and actually those that bring in the containers, If I'm the governor or one of the governors of the Southeast, what we should be thinking about is how do we put infrastructure and put in place factors of production that will make manufacturers come into our area. Raising capital is the easiest thing. I say to anybody who cares to listen, our greatest exporter are our diasporans. Over the last 20 years, I've been interacting with our diasporans. We can actually raise between $50 to $100 billion from our diasporans into Nigeria if we put in place the right structure. What are those right structures? The most lucrative rail route in Nigeria is the Lagos, Shagamu, Ijebu-Ode, Ore, Benin, Asaba, Onitsha, Owerri, Sekobakaba, Umuahia, Okigwe, Ebonyi, that is Afikpo, Abakaleke back to Onitsha, is $5.2 billion. The federal government of Nigeria, by reason of the amendment of the national of the constitution, the states, this contiguous state, the southeast governors can actually come together, working with their neighbors from the southwest and the southeast, south to drive this. It's a $5.2 billion project, $1.3 billion equity contribution, the rest debt funding under a design, build, operate, and transfer 45 years arrangement. We can easily raise the funding. We've done the studies. 200 million tons cargo traffic, over 300 to 500 million passenger traffic per annum, is something that can pay back within 5 to 10 years, earning between 1.2 to 2.3 billion. If you borrow $4 billion, raise equity, forget either a Deutsche Bank group or any of the Turkish guys that we're talking with to do this. It's kind of investment that we cut. In fact, logistic cost to move a container from Lagos to the east is about 2.3 million today. But with this arrangement, we will almost reduce the cost by a quarter. The other day, the governor of Imo State went to say they want to dredge. In fact, 80% of traffic, cargo traffic is through the sea. We can dredge from the Atlantic to Orashi, $150 million project. These Southeast governors can put in place an SPV to drive this. From One, from Escravos all the way to Onitsha, they can do it. Have an inland cargo, dredge, do shoreline embankment. The gas resources, the coal. You know, the problem we have is that we are looking at Abuja. See, in 1979, actually, Samuel Lombakwe was governor of Imo State, MPP. He was an opposition governor. Yet, in 4 years, Samuel Lombakwe did something that all the governors in the Southeast over the last 24 he could not achieve. In 4 years, he was opposition governor, crying governor, but he had a focused mindset of what he wanted to do. So we must ask those that govern us at the state and local to sit down. We will provide them with all the structures and templates, the funding that they can use to create the enabling for. Between 27th of November 29th, the Manifesto of Nigeria will be gathered in Enugu, Anambra, Ebonyi, and Enugu State. I expect all the governors, all the ministers, all the National Assembly members from the South to come in and sit down and brainstorm on how we can catalyze productivity in the regions. If we go around this, every region, every state, every local, so let me tell you, Sambo, if the governors are sincere with local government, they can actually provide the direction for the federal government to support them. But everybody is focused on Abuja. Nothing is in Abuja.
The temptation is always here in Abuja, actually, because that's the easiest way for you to get funds. And I'll bring you back, Dr. Akintunde. Some people say that at the rate at which we are going, we may find ourselves into a debt trap, like we had previously, that led former President Olusegun Obasanjo seeking debt relief from Western nations. Do you think we're actually borrowing right to fund the critical sectors? Because they have also been another leg of it that we fund to, we borrow to actually fund lavish lifestyles of our elected representatives. And that, I mean, there was a cartoon I actually saw where the lenders were looking lean and then those who were the borrowers looking fat, and then, you know, in SUVs and the latest, you know, buildings and all of that. So, two questions for you. Aren't we borrowing to get into a debt trap that we may be seeking debt relief? And then are we diverting this into the right ways that the next 2 to 3 years we could get something good out of it?
Yeah, with the way the borrowing is going, we are actually borrowing to get into a debt trap, because what makes somebody to get into a debt trap, when you borrow money and you are not able to pay back within the stipulated time that you agreed to pay back the loan. So if you borrow money and you didn't invest it wisely on projects that will give you a very good returns on those investments, definitely you will get into a debt trap. But I would beg to also disagree a little with Doctor in Lagos, talking about constructing rail lines, for importation and all that, because the south, the southeast and the south, contribute about 60% of containers. I think I'll beg to disagree, because importation is actually one of the problems that we are facing now. We are actually encouraging Nigerians to consume what is produced in Nigeria, that we should reduce reliance on import. If government, for example, this 2.2 billion is invested into power, for example, because we talk about government should borrow for critical infrastructure that can generate funds. If government should borrow this money and put it into power, and Nigeria, for example, have 24 hours power supply nationwide, and we can use this power to produce, and government will also, generate back funds from the provision of this power. Nigerians are ready to pay for 24 hours power supply, and we are going to become productive, and foreign investors will also come in. Even security will go down if we have power, 24 hours power supply. We'll see that our economy will actually, jump up to production, because power is critical to production instead of road. Yes, road is important, but when we have more power, we'll see that production will actually increase. So power is still skeptical. We see the national grid collapsing more than 5 times within just 3 months. So we need to borrow and invest it into critical infrastructures that will boost industrialization. That is just the direction for borrowing. But if we are borrowing to pay salary, borrowing to construct road, borrowing to provide hospital, borrowing to build schools, I tell you, we'll just run into debt trap.
Okay, as we try to round off this conversation, Dr. Obiari, I want you to talk about that, actually, your reaction. Aren't we borrowing into a debt trap?
Sabo, I want to correct an impression. When I talked about doing rail line that links on air to Lagos, I wasn't talking about import. I am not an import apostle. I'm an apostle of productivity and export. Dubai, as an entity, is a hub. Singapore, 721 square miles, smaller than Alimosho, 5.2 million people. Their GDP is about 820 billion. It's a hub. Nigeria can actually become a transshipment hub for the rest of sub-Saharan Africa. And you don't become a transshipment hub if you don't have the requisite infrastructure, sea and the rail gateway to drive it. I sit down here and I look at Netherlands, landmass, reliable landmass, 1.9 million hectares. They do $124 billion annually. Agro-export, $648 billion annually. Population, about 18, 20 million people. Southeast, the same arable landmass, 22 million people. When I talk about the hub, the Southeast can actually become like Netherlands. The Southeast can actually produce and export nothing less than $128 billion agro commodities and other things. The Southeast can actually, the US takes about $124 billion worth of leather, garments, and all those things. You can get them from Manchester and Kano. But we can, from Bangladesh to Vietnam to China, they supply most of the US market. And under the AGOA framework, Nigeria can do $20 billion. But you can only do it when you have the infrastructure, when you have the power, when you have the relief, when you have the international gateway. Kenya does about $3.65 billion worth of veggies annually. From Mombasa to any part of Europe, it's about 7,000 kilometers. From Owerri, Cargo Airport, or Lagos, or Abuja, to any part of Europe, is less than from Mombasa. We can actually do twice what Kenya is doing.
Yeah, but I mean, very quickly, because we are losing time.
If I produce...
We are losing time here. Are we borrowing ourselves into a debt trap? And then also, just before we go, I want you to address one part of it. In the borrowing, the president is pegging the US dollar, $1 at 800 naira. We all know that it's a dollar now. It's about 1,700 in the open market. I mean, people are confused about this. What exactly is going on is what they're asking.
There is no confusion here. Nigeria ticks the right boxes to get the dollar to naira exchange rate down to 200 naira to $1 if we are very serious. All we need to do is a simple law of demand and supply. If we have more supply of the dollar into the economy than demand, the naira will gain over the dollar. While we are having paucity of the dollar over the, because first of all, our crude oil is being stolen like sweet. On the downstream sector, the corruption at the downstream oil and gas is one of the most monumental in the whole world. Look at what Brazil has done. So if we are able to stop the leakages, and boost productivity, non-oil revenue, dollar revenue, to $200 to $250 billion, which we can do. Dollar will crash below 800 naira to $1. It's a far cry to where in 2015, it was 199 to $1. And we can go back to 199 to $1 if we boost productivity. See, Sambo, if you give me 15 minutes, okay, I don't have time, I will show you what we can do,
well,
how we can do it
I
across the sectors
we can create a
to
time
make
for
naira
you.
200 naira to $1. It's very easy. So when we see 800 and we are so, is it possible? It's more than possible.
Okay.
When Mr. President said he want to do a $1 trillion economy, it's more than possible.
All right, I love your optimism there, and I'll bring you in, Dr. Ogunshola, to try to wrap up very quickly. I mean, people are confused about that disparity. Why is it 800 naira to $1 when we know that the reality is about, the open market, 1,750,
Yeah, I think this is where we used to have problems too. We always want to anticipate that the naira will actually come down, whereas is actually increasing, the exchange rate is going on. I think even if we are going to speculate, a come down or an increase in the value of the naira, I think the disparity is too wide. From 1,000, even on the NAFEM market, is 1,650 or 670, and then we are now talking about 800. The disparity is too wide, because if we can push it to, I think, 1,200, then we'll know that if it goes below that, we are going to have some, excess. And we can also use that excess to actually do that. But for me, the 800 naira is actually too low, and I don't think that will be feasible in the next few months or in the next 1 year.
All right, and just before I let you go in 30 seconds, Dr. Berry, Nigeria is the third largest indebted country to the International Development Association, IDA. What's your last statement on this?
We can easily repay back everything we've borrowed and go to purchase surplus if we begin to put in place the right fiscal governance structures in place to boost productivity, production to consumption. And like I told you, Sambo, even from the southeast where I come from, we can easily export nothing less than $50 to $100 billion annually. We have the potentials. But the challenge is for those who purport to govern us across the three tiers and arms of government to sit down on the table and look for the Josephs to help them to actualize this. Is achievable. All
right, you happen to be one of the Josephs. Very quickly, I have another Joseph in here. So very quickly, Dr. Akin, Nigeria being the third most indebted, country to this International Development Association, according to World Bank figures. What do you make of that?
I think it's not speaking well about our economy. The government needs to see to reducing borrowing. Borrowing has been increasing and increasing over the years. And at a point, we got our revenue to debt was almost 100%, about 90 or 98%, which wasn't speaking well of our economy. So government needs to reduce the borrowing. Possibly, how would they reduce the borrowing? They have to reduce the ambition of capital project they want to do within a short time. You can spread your capital project within 3 years. You have a 4-year term. Yes, we know 1 year is for politics. If you want to construct a road, don't borrow money that you want to finish that road, Lagos to Calabar, within 1 year. I think that could be overambitious. If they can spread it within 3 years or 4 years, I think it will reduce the level of borrowing per year. And with that, they will also achieve the project that wants to be achieved, so that we can, bring Nigeria back to the light of being a wealthy nation rather than a debtor to the international community.
All right. We must thank you so much, Dr. Akin Ogunshola, who is an economist and one of the Josephs on this panel, according to Dr. Nameka Obiari. Well, I must thank you so much for also providing the Joseph strategy for the government free of charge. And I just hope they will be getting in touch with you to provide some of this free consulting that we at Arise News have been helping Nigerians to provide through you. We must thank you for your immense, depth of knowledge on economic matters. And gentlemen, thank you so much for coming on this program. We'll now go on a short break when